One of the observations about modern life is that a lot of the advice about living a good life and being happy and being able to cope is complicated, and people often say life and the advice we get is too complicated. Where can I start? What should I do? But to help people really change or manage, it has to be straightforward and simple, doesn't it?
Absolutely so, isn't it? It's amazing. We did work out once, didn't we, how there's, I forget how many tens of thousands of books about leading your life. And that can't be right. I mean, to lead a proper life, it's got to be a simple, straightforward thing. And I mean, I know you and I are both struck, aren't we, by CBT and DBT and ACT and motivational interviewing and all these things, and they are all very good, but it must all boil down ultimately to something that everyone can understand and everyone can act on without getting too convoluted about it.
And the first step in that process is forming a relationship, and I found where I've made mistakes is where I haven't taken the time or formed a good relationship and helped the person feel comfortable. How important is it to get off to a good start in that way?
Well, that's absolutely fundamental, isn't it? Without that, you've got nothing. I can remember, I mean, it's a bad story really, but I can remember a patient I saw, and she was agoraphobic basically. And normally I like every patient I see. But this one, this person, I couldn't kind of quite take to her. And I knew that, and of course she was making no progress. And I knew what it was. I thought, well, I have to like her. That's your job. If you're a therapist, you have to like your patients, I believe. I think when people talk about unconditional positive regard, it's all very nice, isn't it? But it kind of sanitizes it. I think it's more than that. You do actually have to like the people you're working with. But yeah, unconditional positive regard, liking, absolutely crucial. Along with empathy, warmth and genuineness, the old counselling skills, which they've almost been swept under the carpet a bit, I think.
They have, because it's a two-pronged process. You've got to learn how to be with the person, make them feel safe off for a relationship, but you also got to help them know what to do. In terms of helping someone become optimistic that things can change and be determined, what can we do at those early stages?
Well, let's pull out empathy, why don't we? Because empathy has some very good sort of work on it. And if you look at Miller and so on, he talks about reflecting back what a person has said. And that, the research on that is that it's very effective. It's a very good thing to do. Shows the person that you've understood, you're with them, you're following them and so on. So that's got to be good. But I think there's almost like a second order empathy as well, isn't there? Where, and I think novelists have it very, very well. I remember reading a book by Elizabeth Taylor actually, and it's called Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. And it's about Claremont Hotel. It's got a lot of old people in it, sort of like a residential home almost. And I thought, isn't it remarkable how well she writes about these folk? And I thought, well, she must be 70 or 80 years old and perhaps in this situation. But not at all. When she was writing that book, she was about 35. And I thought, it's just staggering that she can be so empathic to get herself in the minds of those people. And just staggering. And I think psychologists and, I'm as guilty as anybody, will say, well, and ask them, how do you feel? And you think, well, you've got to be able to imagine how the person feels to a degree. It's all very well checking it out, maybe, but the person has to know that you can understand how they feel without particularly asking them chapter and verse. So for me, empathy is a top one.
So it's that ability to be able to walk in the other person's shoes, as it were.
For sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you get the relationship established. The next point, there's an old saying that if you don't have a goal, you can't score.
Yeah.
How important is it to set clear goals early on?
Vital, isn't it? Vital. So important, isn't it? Because when you're doing your assessment and you're asking lots of good questions, hopefully, but the key one is what is the person's goal? Why have they come to see you? And I'm very fond of complex case formulations, but I'm not sure that they're that good. I think the real thing is, what is the person's goal and how can we help them achieve it? And if you can just keep that in mind all the while, then I think you're doing everybody a big favour, you know. Do you see it that way, or are you...
I do, because the person is coming in for help, wants either something to stop or something to start. So a child to go to school, or an adult to stop feeling bad about themselves or stop doing some behaviour. And I think that sometimes as therapists we're more comfortable taking extensive histories and trying to understand what caused the issue instead of actually helping the person make those changes. And I think once people see that change is possible, and once people feel that the therapist is actually interested in helping them reach their goals, not the therapist's goals, it helps everything. It helps the process, also helps the relationship.
Absolutely. Well, you know that I love to use a ladder, where at the top of the ladder you put what the person wants. That's their goal, that's what they want. And then the steps of the ladder are a different part of the brain. They are the logical steps you need to take to achieve what you want. And I think that ladder, if there's one thing you can have in the assessment phase, I think if you use that ladder, it's amazing. And people will take away that ladder and, you know, stick it on a wall at home and so on, and it's their like a roadmap, you know.
Yes. And of course people remember an image more vividly than what we actually say.
Yes. And that's such a good image, I think, because it actually ties up the two separate parts of the brain. The one part of the brain that wants stuff and it motivates the person, makes them keen and so on. And the logical part of the brain that works out, well, to get what I want, what do I have to do? And so to tie those two bits of the brain up neatly in one little diagram is a great thing to do, I think.
Super, makes a link between them both.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
I know, Will, you're a fan of managing complex and multiple amounts of information by checklists.
Yes.
Tell us some of the good things about using checklists.
Well, you have to have a checklist, don't you? Because, brilliant example, you wouldn't get on a plane where the pilot says, I think I've remembered to do everything. Yes, I'm pretty sure I've remembered to do everything. Let's go. They have a checklist. And they've done this a million times before. And they still have a checklist. There's research with surgeons. When they first introduced checklists for surgery, surgeons who used checklists were they had half the mortality rate compared with surgeons who didn't use checklists. And what a gross measure is that, mortality rate. And our brains they're not geared up to reliably remember stuff, great lists of stuff, So if we're talking about, well, for example, an assessment interview, we've done it a million times before, but you still can't guarantee you're going to remember everything for your assessment interview. If you want to assess somebody's risk of suicide, for example, same thing. You know what the factors are, but you still can't guarantee that you're going to remember everything unless you've got the list in front of you. So checklists, just like airline pilots, we should use them for everything good, And
I'm thinking there's two advantages as you explained that. Well, one is that for people coming in, that these are the questions we ask, and everyone gets asked those questions, so it's nothing personal or too invasive. And secondly, if I've seen someone who I worry is at risk of suicide, I can go home knowing that I've asked all the important questions and done as much as I can at that time.
Exactly. So I absolutely agree. And I think the patient loves to see that you've got a system. You're not just sitting there asking whatever questions occur to you. You have a system to ask these questions. They love that, I think, that you are organised and you've been trained. You've got it there in front of you.
And it also seems to lessen the possibility that people take offence, because if you have a checklist, well, you ask everyone these questions, so they're not particular to you.
Super point. Absolutely right. Yes. And you can go on, can't you? There's such a thing as a structured interview, isn't there? Where you're asking, the questions are all written down, and they're quite sort of complicated questions sometimes, and as you say, quite personal questions. But it's all right because it's not personal. You're just reading it from the list. So no, they're terrific at checklists, yeah.
Sometimes when people come in, children or adults, they sometimes feel overwhelmed because things keep happening, a behaviour happens, or they feel a certain way. And for the person at that time, what frightens them or scares them is that it seems to come out of nowhere, it just happens.
Yeah.
But one of the things that seems to be most effective for that is that idea of chaining events together from before it happened to it happening to after it happened.
Yeah.
How important is functional analysis, Will?
Wow. It's interesting, isn't it? You're boiling it down to some absolutely key things, aren't you? You know, and we're just going through these key things. Functional analysis. You know, why does the person do what they do? What is the purpose of it? What are they getting out of it? It's funny because I think the phrase, you know, what are they getting out of it? It's a good phrase because it's sort of clear, but it does make it sound like a devious thing, that they're, you know, somehow deliberately manipulating people to get something out of what they do, which I think 99 times out of 100 is not true. I think it is below the level of conscious awareness, but they nevertheless are sort of, at some level, there's some benefit coming. I mean, it's interesting though, because you work with children a lot, don't you? And I've seen people where, you know, where the child is very anxious or whatever, and the parents pay a lot of attention and protect them and so on. And I've had people say, oh, well, you can see what they're getting out of it. They're getting all the parents' attention and so forth. And I often think, well, that's unfair, really, because what parent wouldn't pay a lot of attention to a very anxious child? They see their child worried to death about whatever it is. Of course you're going to pay them attention. That's just a natural consequence. So I don't think we should come along afterwards and say, oh, well, you can see the function of the behaviour, they're getting attention from the parents. Having said that, often enough, it really is a function to the behaviour, isn't there? And yes, well, I bet you've got, you know, just as many examples as I have. I'm doing a lot of talking, so feel free to, you know, come out with one of your gem examples, I know.
I think the key part with functional analysis is that it depersonalizes, because many of the people who end up in front of therapists all feel already judged. To be sent to a therapist can feel like a judgment that there's something missing or something wrong. And we feel it's really important that you work hard to help the person understand that things happen that may be out of their control, because we don't choose what families are born into, we don't choose our genetics. But the importance then of when people understand a pattern, can see that things could be better, even then change is difficult and scary for people.
Yes.
How do we help people get motivated to make some of those changes? Well,
I love questions. You're a terrific question asker, and I think that's no accident. And questions to gain people some insight and motivation. It's Socrates originally, wasn't it, who asked questions and made people think, you know. And I was talking to somebody the other day about a specialist in anxiety, a colleague of mine who's a specialist in anxiety. And I said, so what's the top tip? If you're on a phone-in program, say, what would be the top tip you would give somebody who phoned up saying they're really, really anxious? And I was interested because he took so long to answer. And I thought, well, he's a specialist in anxiety, so he must know, he must have a good answer to this. Eventually he came out with his answer, which was, as it happens, he said, take exercise. You must take exercise. I thought, well, an interesting answer, but on the other hand, it's also interesting simply to ask the questions of people, isn't it? A slightly more dramatic example I remember was a person I saw. He was in prison for having shot somebody, and he was telling me how that when he got out of prison on this sentence, what he was going to do was to go and shoot half a dozen prison officers for various reasons. And I thought, well, that's terrible, you know. And I was debating this with him. And I debated it with him for about a year, because we had plenty of time, and basically I lost the debate. You know, he had an answer to everything. You know, so every point I put forward, I said, "Well, you'll get found out," And he said, yeah, of course, but I'll be famous. So I'll be more famous than you'll ever be. And you're having shot all these prison officers. Yeah. I said, yeah, but you'll be locked up in prison again. He said, yeah, but it'll be a better prison than this one, you know, and so on. And all this. So every point I made, he had a better answer for it. And then I had a great idea. I thought, I'll ask him a question. Don't mind making a point. So after 12 months, I thought of this question. I said, supposing these half a dozen prison officers, they're all in a minibus going off to work in a different prison for the week. And the minibus crashes and they're all killed. What would you do then? And it really gave him a pause. And he said, well, it's not likely to happen, is it? That was his answer, but he'd had a pause. And he could see he'd sort of taken him back slightly. And I said, well, no, it's not likely to happen, but humour me. If it did happen, what would you do? Where would you go? And he said, well, there's only one place I could go. And that was to a hostel place down in Somerset, actually. And anyway, at the end of the session, we thought it might be interesting for him to write to this hostel and see see whether this was an option and so on. And basically, to cut a long story short, that's where he ended up going. But it was all down to that one question. And it's easy to make it sound, well, surely that you asked him that early on in the sequence. No, that was 12 months into sessions with him. So it shows two things, doesn't it? One is the power of questions, and the other is how slow I am to think of them. But nevertheless, they are great, I think.
I notice for myself, especially when you work with children or anyone who's been traumatized, who don't have language to talk about the past, or even if they had, maybe wouldn't be able to talk about it, that often with those people, that asking questions about the past initially at least aren't great, but what your example shows is asking questions about the future.
For sure, yeah. Well, I mean, you originally asked, how do you motivate people? And motivation is focused towards the future, isn't it? Really, to a degree. And to ask about the future is wonderful, isn't it? There's a standard question, isn't there, where you say, if you could start your life right now, blank sheet of paper, what would you write on it? And it's such it's an old question, but it's such a good question because, well, again, I've used that with one person he'd be in and out of various children's homes, prison, and so on, specialist facilities, and strangely enough, that question followed up, rigorously over session after session after session, was what really got him working. It's fantastic, And it's a lovely optimistic question, isn't it?
It is, but it's also grounded in reality by the fact that you as a therapist kept asking the question because that was encouraging for the person and made him feel that if you think it's possible, then maybe it is possible.
Well, I think you have to have what you want. You have to have a clear notion of your goal, what you want, but you also have to have the plan, don't you? And I think people are very weak on planning. And they say, for example, well, my plan is to give up drinking. Well, that's not a plan. That's just an aspiration. That's just a hope. It's a wish. To have a plan to give up drinking, you actually have to plan out things. You have to say, well, first of all, I'm going to tell people that's what I want to do. So my generous friends who will always ply me with drink, I'm going to ask them not to. Second of all, I'm going to get all the drink out of the house, etc. You have to have actual things you're going to do, rather than say, my plan is to give up drinking. That's not a plan. But it applies to everything. Whatever you want, you do actually have to have a plan to achieve it, don't you? So your goal and your plan, they go hand in hand, and they're super things, I think, to help people work out.
They are, and if people slip or have a bad day or have a drink, it means they just need to change a plan, not to give up.
Exactly, yeah. It's not that they're bad people or whatever, the plan wasn't good enough. So let's refine the plan. Absolutely right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Talking about plans, well, one of the most common experiences for people who have to come and sit with a therapist, psychologist, and so on, is a fear of what's going to happen. And someone once described it to me as talking to a strange person about strange things in a strange place. Terrifying. I don't know what to say. I don't know what you're going to ask. And I really don't want to be here. But one of the things that works really well is you explicitly telling the person, this is what we're going to do. And then each time you meet, that the session follows the format. So how crucial is the session plan?
Absolutely, isn't it? It's just going back to your checklists again, isn't it? Because I always think of Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that person needs to get every bit as good from you as the person at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, And one of the ways of doing it is to have your session plan, isn't it? And you run through, and how have you been since last time we met? It's polite, but it also tells you crucial information sometimes. How did you get on with the homework? And a lot of therapists don't like the word homework, but patients, I've never found a patient who's objected to the word homework. They rather like to be doing it.
Well, it is work you do at home, so you're not deceiving them. They have to do it away from the session.
For sure. And it's crucial, isn't it? Because therapy is a very little period of time. You're back home an awful lot of the time. So how did you get on with the homework? What are we going to talk about today? That's setting the agenda, And maximum 2 things, I think, don't you? And so you agree what you're going to talk about, write them down, then spend the rest of the time pretty much talking about them. Problem solving, constructive ideas, and talking around them. Then, of course, you have to summarise. You also have to agree what homework tasks you're going to do between now and next time. So summarise and set homework tasks in whichever way you like. And finally, you get feedback, don't you? Has today been useful at all? And you have your heart in your mouth, to be honest, when you say things like that. But when the person, and most people are polite, and they say, yes, great. And I think you have to push it a little bit further and say, well, what have been the most useful bits? Because it's back to asking questions again. And it's useful for the person to really think these things through, isn't it? What did they get something out of? And really go with that, So then you use that session plan all the time, just all the time. You can relax about it, you do it naturally, and the patients get their money's worth, basically, Not that we're charging them, but they get value from the time they're spending with you,
They do. I think that homework piece is crucial because with some people who are working with really vulnerable individuals or families, or working with people who aren't well resourced or disadvantaged or downtrodden or hopeless, that in my experience with those people and families, the homework works both ways. The therapist isn't just a person who's giving them therapeutic help, you're also an advocate. So someone might have to go off and try to talk to 3 new people, or try to do something about their exercise regime, but we also might be advocating in terms of better housing or an education issue. So the importance of that collaboration, us being on the one team, the session plan really helps reinforce that.
Oh, for sure, doesn't it just? Yes, it's very, very solid, isn't it? And I mean, just on the homework you mentioned there, yes, the therapist for sure has homework tasks, don't they? But and setting or agreeing the homework tasks for the patient, in a sense, they hardly need agreeing. They seem to be so obvious from the session that they hardly need saying. But they do need saying, but they need to be really good, sensible, down-to-earth tasks. And just to give an example, I was seeing one person, and he's a nice young man, and he was living in his house on his own. And what he really wanted was to establish a relationship, and particularly with the woman next door. And they saw each other occasionally, and he said he'd be making a cup of tea, and you think, well, I should really pop round and ask her around if she wants a cup of tea. And I said, well, why don't you? He said, well, by the time you kind of walk down the path, up to next door, back up her path, it seems like you're making a lot of it, And then she says, no, I don't want a cup of tea, thanks. I said, well, why don't you phone her up? And he said, well, I haven't got her phone number. And it's obvious what the homework task is going to be, is to get her phone number. And he'd been in this state for 6 months. And you think, well, this is amazing, you know. And I was talking to him the following week. And I said, did you get the phone number? He said, yeah. I went straight back home and knocked on her door and said what we'd been talking about. And she gave me a phone number very happily. So, and I thought, well, why didn't you do that 6 months ago, you know? But it's so helpful, isn't it? When you start talking, you do think things through, don't you? And I think, as I say, you're terrific at asking questions, but it really does help the person think things through, you know. Because to sit quietly thinking is not what we're built for, you know.
Sometimes some of the people I work with who are earlier stages in their career, they'll be really scared of saying the wrong thing or asking the wrong thing. And one of the things I've learned from the EPT courses I've done is that one of the questions we need to be careful of is why, because as Marshall Linehan reminds us, we always work with incomplete information. We'll never know everything anyway. And sometimes the why, especially if asked in the wrong way, can feel judgmental or dismissive of people. What kind of questions can we ask in terms of helping people think about change where we'll definitely not do any damage?
Yes, I love what and how questions. You say, why did you do that? You're quite right, it does sound a little bit sort of adversarial, doesn't it, you know? But if you say, what was in your mind when you did that? It's the same question, but it's just a little bit more loosened up a little bit, isn't it, you know? And how did that pan out? Or often enough, I'll find people who say to me, they get into such a situation, and what they do is a very poor solution to the situation they're in. But they say, this is what I do. And I think it's a super question, and a lot of people use it, and it's a very good question there. Say, well, how does that work for you? Or how well does that work for you? And that's such a good question, because it is a Socratic question. It gets the person to think, and they say, well, not very well, to be honest. And in what way? And you can talk about it, and away you go. So what and how questions for me are the questions. I also love what you might call some more complex questions. And for instance, the one I mentioned with the guy who was planning to shoot half a dozen prison officers, that was a kind of complicated question in a way. You paint a scenario and then ask a question at the end of it. I love cars, and I have a friend who will basically sit and talk about cars, and it's obviously very boring if you don't like cars, and there's only so long you can do it. You can't say, what car would you have? It's too basic a question, and there's a lot of things like that. If you're into the subject, you need something more meaty than that. And this guy said to me a few weeks ago, he said, tell me, Will, he said, if you were to choose a car and it had to represent your personality, so it was like you in some way, it sort of suited you in some way, it was realistic. It wasn't a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. It didn't have to be too flashy or expensive. It was a car that you could actually drive around the place without people throwing things at you, and you could actually turn up places to see your patients or whatever it would be. What car would it be? And I thought, gosh, that's a terrific question, isn't it? Because he's basically saying, what car would you have then? Which is too simple a question, but he's put some meat on it. And it's made it feel like an interesting question. You follow along the question as he's asking it, And I thought, he should be a psychologist. He's not a psychologist, but he should be, He's such a good question asker, It
is, and as you're talking about the car, you're actually really talking about yourself.
Yes.
In a nice, calm, relaxed way with someone who's interested.
Absolutely. So the joy of thinking of your question was what a good question. I think the joy of thinking of questions, and I think to delay the question from one session to the next is really good. If you just ask a question straight, it's just an ordinary conversation, isn't it? But if at the next session you say, look, I was thinking what you said last time we were talking, about so-and-so. And I thought, how did that come about? And it sort of gives more sort of importance to the question, doesn't it? You know.
It does. One of the dilemmas many therapists face, Will, is where they are trying to be empathic and understanding and warm and hopeful, and you are trying to get to know someone who might be distressed or might be upset or has had bad experiences of therapy work before. But one of the real dilemmas is that on one hand you're trying to make the person feel understood and valued, but on the other hand the person might be doing things to themselves, like cutting themselves or harming themselves, or not doing things like eating or drinking or getting out of bed that actually is really impacting on their quality of life, and in some cases putting their life in danger.
Yeah.
How do we strike the balance between letting the person feel understood in what they're doing and yet also give them the responsibility and choice of doing something about it? How important is validation? Yeah,
validation, it's terrific, isn't it? And it's one of these things that you do all the while, and it's you will explain why people do something. Even when we're talking to each other, I'll be telling you about some strange thing I've done, and you will say, well, I can see why you did that. It's because it harks back to such and such a thing, and what you were thinking was so and so. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so you're not just taking it at face value that what a stupid thing to do, you know. You validate it like that, and then that leads on, because validating isn't enough, isn't it? So I could reasonably say, well, yeah, that's why I did it. Yeah, but what should I do now? You know, which is because I don't have to convince you now that it wasn't so stupid what I did. You explained to me why I did it, so on. I was meeting up with, thanks to the wonders of Facebook, I was meeting up with a guy I'd not seen for 50 years. So I was at school with him, and he's one of my best friends at school. And he got in touch, thanks to Facebook. And we're meeting up at the local motorway services for a cup of coffee. And this was due to happen at 12:30, midday. And I was finding myself, 11 o'clock, I was finding myself getting really nervous. I thought, well, that's stupid, isn't it? Why are you nervous about seeing somebody who used to be your very good friend 50 years ago? But I was quite nervous. So I thought, I'll mention this to somebody who's likely to validate me. And so I mentioned it. And she said, yeah, of course you are. And that was it. That was, I'm not surprised. I felt a wonder better. And then she went on to sort of give a bit of reassurance, about how well it would go, because on account of my great qualities and so on, which of course I love to hear. And but so to do that wonderful thing, to validate and lead on is what you do, isn't it? And back the person up a little bit. You make them feel. I was talking to someone the other day, and he said you have to encourage people. And he said, in other words, you have to put courage into them. Put courage into them. You have to give them the courage to do stuff. I thought, well, that's a good way of putting it, And he was a very good encourager, Yeah.
And of course, courage is recognising that it's being scared and doing the thing anyway.
Well,
it's
sure,
not feeling scared, because that's something else. It's interesting as you're describing that, Will, because for many people, imagine an hour and a half before you go to see a therapist, they might have those same feelings, because as much as is positive, there's probably also going to be some expectation that this person will ask about your earlier life, and maybe stuff that you don't want to talk about either.
Yeah.
So that maybe what folk would come to see us, maybe that's very understandable as well.
Yes. Well, for sure, isn't it? Why should people tell you everything?
Exactly.
It's we have to get used to. Well, it's one of your slogans, isn't it? We have to get used to working with incomplete knowledge.
I think we also have to earn respect that we are trustworthy and we do what we say and we keep our promises. And I think adults, particularly children, will keep you to that. They'll judge you by what you do more than what you say, which is pretty sensible way of living life, really. So, the validation piece, you give the person the encouragement, but for people, they want to see change, or that changes happen, and in my experience that comes down to everyday things, that they can see the small change on a wet Tuesday or a damp Thursday. How do we help people make those, the life worth living, the small changes on a day-to-day basis? How do we do that?
Well, partly it's homework, isn't it? Partly it's asking questions that give them insights and motivation. And partly you really have to record things, don't you? And I think recording is terrific. And I think it has to be simple. People don't like complicated things. And I mean, just about every course you see has diary keeping. Well, I never have much joy getting people to keep diaries. People don't want to be keeping complicated diaries about what they were thinking, what they did, how that made them feel, and so on. I think it's way too complicated for most people. On the other hand, when somebody comes in, if you see them weekly, to get them to tell you how the week went, and overall then how is their sort of mood level out of 10, I think that's immense, isn't it? And if you ask the same question every time, then you can look back. I remember one young man came to see me, and on some depression and mood, I normally ask questions from 1 to 10. So, how would your mood be? Where 10 is the best possible you could ever be, and 1 would be the worst possible you've ever been. And he wasn't a dramatic young man at all, but he gave it 2 or 3 seconds thought. He said 0. He said, but don't tell my dad. His dad was waiting downstairs. His dad had brought him, and but don't tell my dad, because I try and keep it from him a bit, But it's a very good sort of starting point, because later on he saw me for a long time actually, and later on it was a question whether his mood was 7 or 6, and 6 he was a bit disappointed if it was a 6, and you could always reflect on that it had originally been 0, So you do have to have a starting point, and the fluctuations that go on, because it's not a straight line, is it, that people just get better. It doesn't happen like that. So you have to, and I think you don't have to be in a hurry to say goodbye to people, do you? You have to see them for extended periods sometimes.
I think so. And I think the thing about writing stuff down, even nowadays with young people, particularly on phones, you can write something down. I had one young guy recently who didn't want to keep a mood diary because he was afraid someone would find it and find out that he was keeping such a thing. But he just kept a series of numbers on his phone, 9624. So when he came in, he could say, well, Tuesday was 9, Wednesday was 3, so he could talk himself through. But any form of recording that. I've also noticed through the courses, so there's a real focus on if the person hasn't done the homework, no big deal, and get on with it as if they've had, and maybe start at the beginning of the session and say, well, even what's been the best thing and worst thing this week, and just get going on that.
Yes, for sure. And I think particularly with depressed people in particular, I think a breath of fresh air is when you say, what's the worst thing that's happened this week?
Yeah.
I think it comes over as proper empathic. And then you can lead on to what's the best thing that's happened.
Exactly.
You kind of are accepting that they are depressed, which is it's nice, I think. It's kind of polite.
It is. And also people feel sometimes that their job is to almost make us feel happy and tell us the right answers, or else we'll feel bad about ourselves. So by asking what's the worst thing happened first, you're giving the person a chance to tell you without feeling that they have to sugar the pill.
Have to cheer you up.
Exactly. And one of the things I also find works really well is questions before homework. So one of the techniques I picked up on one of the courses was where we asked people before they go, what's the worst thing that's going to happen this week? And put a number on it. And what's the best thing, the thing you're looking forward to? And again, put a number from 0 to 10. But of course what happens usually is that the thing that we really look forward to maybe wasn't just as good.
Yes.
And the awful thing maybe wasn't just as bad.
Well, for sure. It's interesting. People are very fascinating with the things like, there was one person I knew who, she would, you'd say to her, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, I might say to you, well, what's the worst thing that could happen when we're sitting here doing our conversation, You say, well, we both dry up and have nothing to say. And for most people, probably that'd be the worst thing that could happen. But for her, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, the building could collapse on top of us, and then it'd probably catch fire kind of on account of various things that have happened in the collapse. And then we'd be burned alive because we couldn't get out, trapped on top of us and so on. And so I learned not to ask her that question, because she straight away went into that, and quite genuinely, she could envisage that happening, But yes, 999 times out of 1,000, that's such a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Some criticism of therapy these days, especially things like cognitive behaviour therapy, is that there's just too many words, and that for some of the folk we work with, be it because they're younger or children, or be it because of learning or other issues, that talking doesn't suit them, that they find it off-putting, or they find it difficult to follow. And sometimes the language of therapy can be hard to understand.
Yeah.
But what often can work is to step away from language completely and look at the whole idea of metaphor. And one of the things I notice, especially with younger people, but not always, is when you ask most people how they're feeling, they'll often give you a physical metaphor. They'll say, I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulder. I feel like this person stabbed me in the back. I feel this person's kicked me in the teeth. I feel there's nothing but darkness ahead.
Yeah.
How important is it to work, when people give us those metaphors, to work with them?
Yeah, they're super, aren't they? Well, we both love metaphors, don't we? So I'm just trying to think of, so those are good examples, I think. So you've tuned me into thinking of other good examples. I had a lady who came to see me, and she kept coming to see me, and she was basically suicidal, and her mother had taken her own life, and she was suicidal, and she'd reached the age that her mother was when she took her life. So she could kind of see that happening. And she would keep coming, and she was making good progress, really. But and the sessions were stretching out. She came every month or whatever. And she said, one time she came and said, "Do you know, I feel I'm like a car. It keeps breaking down. And we're trying to cross the Sahara Desert and getting to Cairo." I thought, gosh, talk about metaphors. It's a really vivid metaphor she had in her mind. I said, I don't think I'm ever going to do it, And I just keep breaking down, and you keep fixing me, and I limp on a bit further, but I don't think I'm ever going to do it. And I thought, gosh. And what I said was, well, but think of yourself that it's worth doing because you're a classic, valuable, real classic car. And you have to get to Cairo, where everything will be settled then, So you just have to get every repair done to get across the desert. And I thought that was quite good. But I mentioned this to somebody else, and he said, no. What you should have said was, look, yeah, that's right, you keep coming in, you keep getting fixed up, and basically, the more often you do that, the better it is, because if you're a car, you come in, the first time you come in, we replace all your tyres. You've got nice new tyres, all right. Then next time you come in, you've got a nice new carburettor, and so on. And the more often you come in, the quicker you are like a brand new car, because you've done all these great things. I thought, wow, that's really good, isn't it? And you'll be motoring on across the Sahara as happy as Larry, So I thought, yeah, that's a really good metaphor. And it's, again, you can think of these things in between times and say them next time you see the person. And that's a big relief to me, because to have to think of great things instantly is very, very difficult, isn't it?
It is, and sometimes there's a pressure to be like a sort of a psychological trick pony who can pull the right phrase or right word out, whereas especially when people give their own metaphors, that grows over the week and over the weeks where you can actually develop them better as well.
Yes. But I love what you said about words are too much sometimes. And there's one guy, highly intelligent guy actually, words were fine, he was very good with words, he had a fantastic high-flown job and so on. And he came in with this problem. He was married with 2 children, and he'd started a relationship with somebody else. And he said it was like choosing between being hanged or being guillotined. And I said, well, how's that? He said, either I leave my wife and children, the teenage children, or I leave the only woman I've ever loved. And he said, how do I choose? And of course, put like that, it does seem like choosing between being hanged and guillotined, yes. And he was in torment. He described to me what torment he was in. He said he hadn't slept for 2 years. He'd been trying to work this one out for 2 years. And he said he felt so feeble because in his job he was working out multi-million-pound contracts here, there and everywhere. But he couldn't work out this one simple thing, as he put it, you know. And I thought, well, he's wrong though, isn't he? The torment is his current situation. He's saying it's like, yeah, he's all right for the moment, doesn't want to be hanged, doesn't want to be guillotined, just stay as you are, you know, with his family, but with his other relationship as well. But no, that's the torment. So it's difficult in words to draw this out, but we actually got a bit of paper and we drew a big chasm. So it is huge, you know, sheer sides, and he was at the bottom of this big chasm. And you know, and up at the top of the chasm, sunny uplands, you know, but he was at the bottom of a dark chasm, and that was his current situation. And then at the top, on either side of the chasm, was one person on one side, one person on the other, both of them lowering down a rope to him, up which he could climb. And in a sense, it didn't matter which rope he climbed out of, but he had to climb up one of them. But staying in the chasm, that was the torment. And that one picture, and I don't draw very well, but it was just a basic picture, that did it for him. Totally viewed it a different way, saw it a different way. And the rest of our sessions were all about which rope he was going to climb up. And he eventually came to a decision. I thought he was just going to just stay choosing the which rope, but he eventually did. And that was it. And he felt he'd made the right decision, and so on, you know.
And the metaphor there opened the door where he could see no other option, no other outlet at all.
Yes.
Give him an escape from the awful end.
Exactly, yes.
Wow.
Yes. So metaphors are really, really powerful, I think, yeah.
My favourite one is the one on the metaphor section of the courses. You talk about a client you met after many years who remembered only one thing from the sessions, and I think you'd been encouraging this person to take more responsibility for their life and be proactive. And it was something like you'd said to her, if the grass is always greener on the other side, maybe you're not looking after your own patch well enough.
Absolutely, isn't it? It's a good metaphor, isn't it?
Good metaphor, yeah.
You're quite right. I bumped into her in the street in Leicester, and we were talking. We were sort of reviewing years ago. And I said, what was the best thing? What was the most useful thing we did? And that's what she pulled out. Of all the sophisticated things, as I would have seen it, all the sophisticated things we'd done, that was what she pulled out as the best thing we'd done.
But again, showing that something like that, something novel, something different, something sensible, is going to stay with the person long after whatever we've said or done.
Yeah.
Well, we live in an era where psychological interventions have become more, I suppose, regulated, but also more evidence-based, and a lot of work has been done through research and various bodies around what works for which conditions and how we should approach this. Tell us a little bit about the role of evidence-based practice in terms of putting courses together.
Yeah. Well, I worry a little bit about evidence-based practice because some therapies are much better researched than others. And the implication is that the ones that haven't been well researched aren't any good. Well, that's not logical. They may be really, really good. They may be the best therapies, they just haven't been researched well enough. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence,
exactly.
as they say.
Exactly.
So the way around that, I think, is to, what do they call it? It's not evidence-based practice, but practice-based evidence. So in your practice, you're keeping a tally, you're really evaluating what you're doing. And to have that evidence in front of you, it's convincing for your patient, it's convincing for you. If you're not making progress, then you need to do something different, you know. And so it's very important to have. And it is, I mean, it's quite right, I think, the emphasis on evidence-based practice. It's right, but we don't want to limit ourselves artificially or wrongly, you know. So, but just to collect evidence, crucial, yeah.
And that interchange is important, because I think when I've made mistakes and got it wrong with people, it wasn't because I wasn't following the evidence base. So, say CBT for depression, for example, it was because I wasn't paying enough attention to the other side of the loop, basically the practice-based evidence. And I saw a really wonderful example of that a few years ago, doing one of the RAID visits to one of the centres of excellence, and what they had on each person's room on the doorway was basically a user manual how to work with Will. These are the things Will's likes, these are his interests, these are the time of days he most enjoys, these are the things that he always responds to. So it was almost like not just works with the depressed person, but what works with the individual. And I think that's a two-way street, what works generally with depression, but more importantly, what works really well with this individual and how to get the best out of them. And it's a feedback loop as much as anything else. And Sir Allen reminds us that even though we follow principles and best practice and guidelines, that each time we sit down with someone, we create a new therapy. It's always individual and it's always unique to that person's own needs at that time.
Yes, very, very nice, isn't it? Isn't it, that user's manual for yourself is really good, isn't it? You know, to decide, you know, what your principles are, which friends you want and which friends you don't want, what jobs suit you and what jobs don't suit you, and to be proactive about making decisions along those things. It's the stuff of life, isn't it? And it almost goes back to the beginning where we said, it can't be that difficult, can it? And I think if you get those things ticked, you know, what are your principles, who are your friends going to be and not, and what are you going to spend your time doing at home and at work particularly, then you know, you're 90% of the way there, aren't you? You are. And yet, despite all of the EPT way, the emphasis on positivity and engagement, on planning, on structure and encouragement, you will still, as a therapist, come across some really sad stuff, some really stomach churning distress and horrific trauma in the past or ongoing for people. And often what seems to cause those people the most distress is what you might call the second arrow. The second arrow, yeah. The second arrow. Amazing, isn't it? Because the second arrow, I think, is very often much worse than the first one. And it's what puts the person into a complete spiral downwards. And just to go back over what the second arrow is, it's I was watching TV the other day, and there's a celebrity actually talking about being depressed and his bouts of depression. And he was talking about it, and there's two things going on. One was he got depressed, and the other one was it absolutely made him wild and frustrated and angry that he got depressed. And it was this wild, frustrated, angry bit that seemed to be worse than the actual depression, you know. So it's bad enough being depressed, having bouts of depression, but 10 times worse if you then have the second arrow come in. How stupid am I? You know, how can I get not over this? And he carries on with that even outside the bouts of depression. And that's the second arrow. And I think that's one of the great things of mindfulness, where they teach you non-judgmental acceptance. I'm depressed at the moment, okay, so be it. In a sense, so what? It's bad enough being depressed. You don't now need to go on and turn it into a terrible, terrible thing. And the same thing applies to whatever it is. A lot of people wake up at sort of 3 a.m., that kind of time, very anxious. And it's just, presumably some biological thing, I don't know, but very, very anxious. And there's one person who's telling me what he'd done. He'd trained himself to, you know, when he woke up, really kind of petrified almost with anxiety. He just turned, here I am, I'm petrified with anxiety. cut there. There's no need to worry about the fact that you're petrified with anxiety. It's bad enough being in that state without now having a second hour of thinking in, saying, "Wow, that's terrible. Why are you so worried?" You don't need to do it. You just accept it, and that's what stops the spiral, I think. And to me, that's one of the great things about mindfulness, that it really helps people to do that. Just accept it. And it's not what we're normally taught to act, aren't we? To intervene. What are you going to do then? And sometimes that's good, but sometimes you just accept it.
And I think that whole idea of mindfulness, of one, doing nothing on purpose, or two, Kabat-Zinn talks about falling awake, is really powerful, because some of the people I've worked with, their behaviour will be described as mindless.
Yes. Whereas
actually, if you turn that on its head and say, I want you to do exactly nothing the next time that happens, you feel that urge, it can be, well, it's a risk assessment and prevention measure very important, but also it allows people to notice all the things that are happening rather than always acting on the urge, whatever that might have been.
Absolutely, yes. Feels kind of better, doesn't it? That, I'm going to take action about this. Sometimes, one of your favourite slogans is everything's temporary, everything passes.
Yeah.
So long as you don't pour petrol onto the flames, it will pass.
Good or bad, nothing lasts.
Nothing lasts.
People would agree with that by and large. Nothing does last generally.
Great thing to think when things are bad. Not so good.
That's right. That's right. I'll give you something to compare it with as well. The other thing I noticed, that particularly when people are significantly distressed, is that many of the people you'd see, whatever age, is some kind of a difficulty around their body clock or circadian rhythm. They often either sleep too much or not enough, eat too much or not enough or not at all, or are too active or not active enough, and maybe throwing in some of the stuff that isn't always good, alcohol and sometimes even drugs. How important is it as a step to help people get more stable in themselves, to look at that kind of biological rhythm each day?
I'm really pleased you brought that one up, actually, because it's such a boring one. I find it on the courses, it's the one people just turn off. Circadian rhythm, heard it all before, read it in the magazines, blah blah blah. And but it's absolutely crucial with serious patients. It's amazing how often their circadian rhythm is it's not just that it's shot to pieces. They've never established one, and this is what's working so badly against them. It's amazing. And it's to resist the temptation to go on to sophisticated, looking at their cognitions, etc., which is good, but to really just to sort out the circadian rhythm, I think, is you got to start with your foundations, haven't you? And that is wonderful, and it's just one of the most difficult things to teach, the importance of doing that and not moving on to something that's more interesting.
Yeah, and yet the practical appeal, because if you send someone home to eat better or to rest better or to be more active, at least it's something that they can do, and creates the possibility that within your mind you'll find some balance or some peace, and not all the time be overwhelmed by guilt or anxiety or shame or anger or whatever it'll be. So it's just a really important kind of first step as well.
Well, it's a very important first step, and I think for people like you and I, it's easy to assume that, it's an easy first step that people can take. Can they hack? When you actually work with people, well, I know you know this, but when you work with people who've got disrupted circadian rhythms, it's really difficult to get them to put it right. For example, if a person hasn't slept through the night, what do they want to do during the daytime? They want to have a nap here and a nap there and so on, And what effect does that have on their upcoming night time? Well, they can't sleep again, And they turn day into night and night into day, and that is just common enough. But even at a low level, where people nap during the day and not sleep very well at night, they've more or less got a circadian rhythm, but it's not very good, and it's working against them. It's a brilliant one to work on.
It is, and also adding in strategic relaxation or people taking time just to notice things or to be can help in the middle of that rhythm as well.
For sure, yeah. Yes, that's right. People don't drive themselves half as well as they drive their cars, do they? You have to take action to steer yourself in the right direction, go at the right speed, pause when you need to pause, and so on. And some people just do not do that, and they suffer for it.
They do. Many of the people who come to the APT courses and develop the skills are working in situations increasingly where they simply wouldn't have the time with clients that maybe they used to, or as an expectation of pushing change much more rapidly and much more short-term focus. In that regard, one of the things that always strikes me, I think of the old saying about if someone is hungry, you can give them a fish each time, or you can actually teach them how to go and fish themselves.
Yeah.
So that whole idea of actually helping people learn skills that'll help with the current problem that they can call on again and again, how crucial is that?
Yeah. It's terrific, isn't it? Because it's come back into vogue again with DBT. And to me, the basis of DBT is to teach people really good skills that are going to stand them in good stead in their lives, like interpersonal skills, how to regulate their emotions, and so on, how to tolerate distress and so forth. So terrific skills to teach people, and it's good to teach them well in a classroom situation. But the wonderful thing that DBT does, I think, is it helps people to transfer them from the classroom situation into real life. You can have telephone support, you can actually give them every support and every assistance into doing it in real life. With adolescents, which I know is your speciality, it's almost even better, because the parents can come along to the skills training sessions, and they all learn everyone learns the skills, and they can help each other, as it were.
That's right.
back home again. That's right. So it's almost better with adolescents, I think.
It is, and it's fun, and it makes sense, and it's learning, and it gets away from the awful blaming and shaming that can go on in those situations. It's something, and of course it's future focused. I had an experience recently with a taxi driver. It was the psychologist's worst nightmare, where you sit into the taxi and the taxi driver says, "Oh, so you're a psychologist, okay? So okay, then what's the best advice you've ever given?"
Yes.
And I remember, I've heard a few versions of other people's taxi driver story, but all I could think of, it took a long time. I think he was wondering, was I actually a psychologist at all? But I remembered something about relationships and helping people to be able to repair relationships. If they're in a relationship that simply is too toxic or damaging, to try to get out of it. If they're in a relationship where they're giving too much or not getting enough, trying to repair and do something with that. At every stage of life, I think the ability to repair relationships is absolutely crucial. What do you think?
Absolutely, and the Harvard study, the Grant and Gluck study, that's amazing. It shows the effect of relationships. But, well, for sure, and it's interesting you focus on repairing relationships, because people get into relationships which they'd be better off not in, really. There's somebody for everybody, and whether we're talking about intimate relationships or friendships or work-based relationships, there's always somebody for everybody. And in a sense, you do have to not try too hard. You have to stick to the people who suit you and you suit them, and so on. Square pegs in square holes, round pegs in round ones. You have to be in the right situation in every regard, don't you? And relationships is probably number one, I think, isn't it?
It is. It's interesting though, because apart from the people who are unlucky enough to be caught up in a major terrorist incident or major crash, that most of the trauma we see in our work is interpersonal trauma. Yeah. It's damage that's been done from one individual to another by what they've done, or by maybe what they've not provided in terms of love or nurture. And so relationships can be incredibly important, but also can be very damaging.
Yes. Very interested you mention by what people have done or not done. And I think that's, well, I'm talking out of turn here because it's your speciality, but it seems to be a lot of sort of less dramatic damage is done by parents not doing things, not playing with the kids, not having fun with them, not doing stuff. It's not headline stuff, the absence of something. But in a way it sort of should be, because it's for some people it is like an epidemic. They just never do that, And it's a real lack, I think.
It is. But it's interesting, especially with nowadays, there's much more of a focus on child welfare or well-being, whereas for many of those parents who are trying to keep a roof over their head, try to earn enough money, and try to be a good parent.
Yes.
But many of those people didn't have that in their childhood either.
Yes.
And maybe back in the 80s or 70s, or that wasn't such a big deal. So it's that whole importance of looking at how skills in relationships help. And I think I've met families where the parents simply didn't know what to do. It wasn't that they were bad
Yes.
people, they just didn't know what to do because they didn't have it either. So it's
Yes.
not about judging people because it's an interaction between all, but that's where skills can be really powerful, and don't blame or shame anyone, which is crucial as well.
I think one of the great things is the classes they now have for parents, where people actually taught parenting skills, you know. Not many people, unfortunately, but the more the merrier, I think. The more people get those kind of skills learned, the better. Or even just the forum to talk with other parents and, you know, discuss your problems and solutions that people have come up with and so on, you know. I think that's really good work, isn't it?
It is. And I think a related point is one of the frustrations for many therapists is, even if you work in a service, we have the luxury of seeing people weekly, and I know many people don't have that, but even if you had that luxury, asking yourself, how much influence do we really have on an individual? We've met them at X stage in their lives, we've got X amount of time, even if it's an hour a week, there's 167 other hours. And yet one of the things that I've picked up through EPT's courses is how important it is to do your best to influence the environment that the person is in.
Yes. Homework tasks and influence the environment. And I mean, one of the homework tasks, of course, can be to help the person have the courage to alter their environment, to put themselves in a different environment. I mean, it's tragic to me that people sort of persist in jobs that don't suit them at all. And more's the pity, because there'll be somebody else who does suit the job they're in, you know, that they could move better into that space, you know. So if everyone sort of really tries to find an occupation that suits them and people that suit them, but have the courage to do that when you know you're surviving in the situation you are. Why would you risk changing it, you know? Maybe because you're not surviving quite as well as you could do. That's the answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And also with some client groups who are more difficult to engage or don't want therapeutic work, we can still have a useful role in helping the people who care for those people in that environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. And that will be reflected through things. I think the RAID course is a good example where I may not have the best relationship at all with a person, but if a young person or adults live in, say, in a unit, that maybe someone who works there is the key person. So supporting that person to in a sense be the therapist for the client.
Absolutely right, yes. To know your own limitations is good, isn't it? And if you know, if I know I'm not the best person to work with Alan, then it's best that I leave Alan to you, you know? So, of course, I don't want to do that, because I want to be the best person to work with everybody. But you have to know your limitations, don't you?
You do. And I think one of the notable features in recent years is how, I suppose through mindfulness, but also through other channels, how that whole idea of Buddhist life or Zen life has become apparent, where people are now more openly saying than they were 20 years ago, that in many ways that the natural sense of to be alive is to suffer, that we all suffer,
yes.
that we're all in pain, and that suffering is unavoidable. How can we balance that well with helping people talk about happiness?
Well, happiness is a man-made construct, isn't it, or a person-made construct. And I think Paul Gilbert's very good on this, where he says, there's nothing to say we weren't designed to be happy. We just invented it as an idea. You know? We were designed to procreate and perpetuate the species. Happiness is just something we've invented. Having said that, we do want to be happy. But I think it's sort of almost like working out what happiness is, isn't it? And going back to our metaphors, in my mind, it's a metaphor for me. It's like listening to your favourite album. You don't enjoy every track of your favourite album. You sit there kind of listening to it, really. But then a good track comes down, your favourite track comes along, and that's happiness. And life is just the same, I think, that by and large, you just live your life. And every now and again, hopefully more often than once every few years, but every so often, a couple of times a day or whatever, you have a zing of happiness, But you cannot be happy all the time because of habituation. You simply habituate to whatever the current situation is. But you hope to have highs every now and again.
And I guess you're happy all the time, you'd have nothing to compare it with, so it would become bland.
Yes, that's right.
So to move toward conclusion, well, the next time I'm in a taxi, so if I get a taxi tonight, I'm telling the taxi driver I was with Dr William Davies, founder, director of APT, who's written training courses that over 100,000 people have attended, and we were discussing the APT way and the approach. What should I tell the taxi driver when I'm asked to summarise it?
You remind me of a radio program that it featured one comedian each week, and the radio program started with the comedian. His task was to tell his best joke, and my word, what a terrible thing! Because every week I listen to this, I think, goodness, is that your best joke? And you're a comedian, and I thought, why ever did these comedians? Why did they agree to do such a foolish thing? And so I suppose that's, in a way, that's my response. But it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning, isn't it? That basically leading life is simple. And the trouble is, there isn't just one answer to it. Yeah. But we don't want to get too complicated, but there are several things going on, and you need to tackle all of those several and just tick them off nicely that you've got them in line. And can't accept everything, but to a degree we have to accept what we got, and we have to strive a bit as well. And it all balances up in the end, doesn't it? So obviously your taxi driver is going to be very disappointed with that, because you always want one answer, but I really don't think there is there?